The entry of the United States into the Second World War was in many ways politically inevitable. American material and naval support for Britain had already created a de facto alliance. Yet, pre-Pearl Harbor, Hitler's political considerations had prevented preemptive action against American vessels. The German naval staff had long recognized American determination to aid Britain already in July 1941, but as late as September of that year, Hitler rejected proposals to take action against American vessels. Then came December 7, 1941. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor removed all political barriers. For Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the U-boat arm, this was a profound moment of relief. His diary entry of December 9th expressed his anticipation the restrictions on U-boat warfare would now be lifted. Donitz swiftly ordered his U-boats westward, a strategic decision to exploit what he perceived as the profound weakness and inexperience of American anti-submarine forces in their own coastal waters. On January 13, 1942, Operation Paukenschlag drumbeat commenced. This marked the beginning of the American coastal battle. The initial weeks of Paukenschlag were a period of extreme vulnerability for American shipping. The United States, despite its industrial might, was catastrophically unprepared for submarine warfare. German U-boats, like Lieutenant Commander Hardegen's U.123, achieved staggering successes. Hardegen's detailed log entries from January 18 to 19, 1942, off Cape Hatteras, recorded the sinking of 8 ships, including 3 tankers, totaling nearly 54,000 tons, within a mere 12 hours. These devastating results were achieved with minimal U-boat losses. American waters were indeed a rewarding area, with very heavy traffic sailing independently and unescorted. Merchant ships made unrestricted use of the 600-meter band for radio communication, providing U-boat commanders with precise target information. The average monthly sinking rate for 1941 had been 230,000 tons. To deal a mortal blow to Britain, 800,000 tons per month were needed. The early successes of Paukenschlag suggested Germany might achieve just that. For decades, a common narrative suggested American defenses were robust from the outset. However, historical analysis reveals a significant period of unpreparedness, a stark revelation of the American naval and air defense's vulnerability to submarine warfare. This temporary strategic initiative, gained by Germany, posed a credible threat to Allied supply lines and the entire war effort. Yet, this initial advantage was progressively eroded, as U-boat aces like Hardegen, Mar, and Top continued to achieve immense sinkings off the American coast, and in the Caribbean during March 1942, the tide was already beginning to turn. Operation West Indian, involving 5 U-boats, aimed to extend this wave of attacks into the Caribbean. However, strategic misallocations began to divert crucial U-boat resources. Hitler, driven by acute fears of an Allied attack on Norway, demanded U-boat deployments for its defense. Despite Admiral Donitz's perturbation at this misdirection, believing it detracted from the vital Atlantic War, up to 20 medium U-boats were diverted to the Iceland-Faroes, Scotland area. Crucially, German innovation provided a temporary solution to the logistical challenges of distant patrols. The Uteco-natured AGs of distant patrols. These Type 14 vessels, such as U.459 Coma capable of carrying 700 tons of diesel fuel, were a most important development. They enabled U-boats to greatly prolong their operations in distant areas, allowing 12 medium U-boats to reach the Caribbean or 5 large boats to operate off Cape Town. The first U-boat, U.108, refueled from U.459 near Bermuda on April 22, 1942. But the Allies were adapting. April 1, 1942, marked a significant shift. The introduction of the first partial convoy system. This moved American defensive strategy away from scattered, independent shipping towards coordinated protection. Donitz's war diary from May 16, 1942, reflected the immediate impact. Since the 20th of April, the situation on the North American coast has been extremely bad. It seems that it has either been temporarily suspended or so routed as to escape their observation. The climax of the American coastal battle was being met with increasingly effective Allied defenses. U-boat commanders also began to encounter mysterious vessels with the cable-laying bow, hinting at new enemy detection systems. In the Bay of Biscay, the unexplained losses of U.82, U.587 and U.252 ignited suspicion of sophisticated British ASV radar, a technology the German Navy initially struggled to comprehend. On April 14, U.85 became the first U-boat sunk by Allied ASW vessels, a harbinger of the challenges to come. The U-boat campaign's initial successes off the American coast were significantly hampered and ultimately undermined. The German strategy of confining U-boat attacks to specific, predictable areas allowed the Americans to concentrate their anti-submarine forces. The introduction of the convoy system, observed near Cape Hatteras by May 9, 1942, fundamentally altered the operational landscape. While the Milch Cow U-tanker was a critical innovation, enabling extended operations to more dispersed, less defended areas like the Caribbean, it was ultimately a response to an evolving threat. By early May 1942, 16 to 18 U-boats were deployed between Cape Sable and Key West. However, the failure to quickly recognize and adapt to the convoy system represented a critical strategic miscalculation by the German U-boat command. Dönitz, however, understood the core strategic rationale. As he noted on April 15, 1942, by attacking the supply traffic, particularly the oil, in the American zone, I am striking at the root of the evil. For here, the sinking of each ship is not only a loss to the enemy, but also deals a blow at the source of his shipbuilding and war production. Between January 15 and May 10, 1942, 112 tankers, totaling 927,000 tons, were sunk. Yet, U.S. shipbuilding targets, 2,290 ships aggregating 16.8 million tons between 1939 and 1943, remained formidable. The shift of focus to the Caribbean from May to July 1942 was a direct response to declining effectiveness off the U.S. coast. U-boats, replenished by U-tankers like U-Tank 459 and U.460, now ranged across the Lesser Antilles and the Orinoco Delta. Lunty-Commander Achilles, commanding U.161, executed bold penetration attacks into the harbors of Port of Spain, and Porto executed bold U.130, even shelled oil storage tanks at Bullen Bay near Curaçao. These operations inflicted severe economic damage, but ultimately failed to cripple U.S. shipbuilding due to the convoy system and relentless production. Beyond direct attacks, U-boats undertook minelaying operations from New York to Cape Canaveral, and in the St. Tuc Comodoral, and in the St. Atexta Berries, Lawrence Estuary, where CDR Thurman in U.553 sank 2 ships in May, though he was then forced to remain submerged for a fortnight by Allied air activity. Operation Pastorius, the landing of German agents on Long Island and at Jacksonville in June, ended in the swift capture of both parties, underscoring the increasing difficulty of covert operations. The period of May and June 1942 was characterized by intensified U-boat operations in the Caribbean and off the U.S. coast. However, it also highlighted the evolving naval warfare tactics, the growing effectiveness of Allied anti-submarine measures, and the initial German underestimation of these threats. By mid-July, 1/3 of the U-boat forces engaged off the U.S. coast had been written off. The introduction of the convoy system off Cape Hatteras on June 24, 1942, marked a direct counter to U-boat tactics, signaling the end of unescorted individual ship sinkings in that area. The growing effectiveness of Allied radar was a critical, unacknowledged threat. German commanders like Commander Marr of U.124 initially downplayed the conclusive evidence of enemy surface radar. The prevailing belief was that Allied aircraft spotted U-boats visually. However, in June 1942, Rear Admiral Stummel, head of the Naval Communications Division, provided the first positive confirmation to FO. U-boats were indeed being located by airborne radar. This realization forced a significant strategic shift. The Metox receiver, a French-produced radar interception instrument, was hastily adapted for U-boats, representing Germany's first primitive countermeasure. Yet, its development was reactive, not proactive. Other German technical shortcomings persisted, such as surface runner torpedoes, whose telltale fluorescence made them detectable. Even U-boat beacon significant, even collicle due to inaccurate reckoning, became a significant liability, frequently leading to detection and attack. Despite the growing threats, the decision was made in early May to resuscitate Atlantic pack operations with Group HECT. 8 medium boats were formed to resume attacks against convoys in the North Atlantic. Later, Group Endras was formed to attack convoy HG-84. Successes were often less than optimal, with Group HECT claiming 5 ships totaling 28,000 tons, and Group Endras 5 ships, which was merely satisfactory. Admiral Donitz visited Luftwaffe headquarters to advocate for increased air support for U-boats, acknowledging the critical nature of the air threat. While 24 Ju-88 C-6 aircraft were eventually allocated to Fliegerführer Atlantic, it was a significant reinforcement effort that still proved insufficient against the increasing Allied air superiority. The Norway Scare and its diversion of U-boats highlighted the detrimental impact of political directives and misplaced strategic priorities. The latter half of 1942 marked a critical juncture in the Battle of the Atlantic. In the first month off the American coast, U-boats sank 362,000 tons of shipping. By June, this rose to an astounding 778,000 tons, dramatically exceeding the 1941 monthly average of 180,000 tons. At its peak, between 120 and 130 ships required protection daily within the U.S. Eastern Sea frontier. The sheer scale of U-boat activity in the first half of 1942 threatened the entire Allied war effort. However, this period also saw the relentless escalation of Allied anti-submarine warfare. Admiralty Net Defense, or AND, was introduced in January 1942 to protect freighters and tankers. High-frequency direction finding, or HFDF, was accepted as essential equipment for escort craft by the end of the year. Most significantly, the Lee light came into operational use in May 1942, a powerful searchlight that aided aircraft in spotting U-boats at sea, even at night. Allied aircraft, by sacrificing bomb loads for extra fuel, extended their radius of action to 800 miles from land bases, providing a widening air umbrella for convoys. Hitler, meanwhile, continued to interfere with U-boat dispositions. Against Admiral Donitz's strategic judgment, he demanded U-boats be held in readiness for potential Allied action in the Azores and Madeira, even instructing Mr. Churchill to examine prospects for a landing in North Norway. This strategic misallocation diverted U-boats from vital hunting grounds. The fog of war often led to German overconfidence and misjudgment. Claims of sinking 3 large US transports against convoy RB-1 were vastly exaggerated. In reality, only 3 river steamers and 1 destroyer were sunk, aggregating a far lower tonnage. Such discrepancies, often made in good faith due to the immense pressures of combat, contributed to a skewed understanding of the true operational picture. A crucial turning point emerged in the last quarter of 1942. New Allied construction began to outpace total losses, indicating a strategic shift in favor of the Allies. This period saw increasing challenges and diminishing returns for the U-boats, a harbinger of the eventual Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic. The period between July and September 1942 represents a critical inflection point for U-boat operations. The growing efficiency of American anti-submarine measures forced U-boat withdrawals from the U.S. coast by July 19, 1942. U-boats subsequently shifted operations to areas south of Nova Scotia, targeting feeder convoys from Boston and New York to Halifax. However, this area too became increasingly dangerous, leading to the loss of U.754. U-boats then ventured into the Gulf of St. Tom 54T. Lawrence in mid-August, where U.165 and U.517 sank 7 ships and torpedoed 2 others. U.513, off Wabama, sank 2 ore ships, was rammed, and later made 2 more attacks. Yet, these were localized successes. The last significant concentration of U-boat force in the Caribbean during August 1942 achieved a peak of achievement off Trinidad in the first half of September, sinking 29 ships totaling 143,000 tons. However, the alarming factor of Allied radar was becoming undeniable. In July and August, it contributed to the losses of U.502, U.578, commercial of 502,751 in the Bay of Biscay. Allied airborne radar carried by Sunderland flying boats and 4-engined bombers now extended its radius of action to 800 miles. The primitive Metox receiver, hastily delivered in early August 1942, was Germany's reactive attempt to counter this threat. Mounted on a wooden cross and connected by a flexible cable, its very simplicity highlighted the urgency and technological gap. Then came the Laconia incident. On September 12, 1942, U.115-6 torpedoed the British liner Laconia 1815 commanded by Lieutenant 15-6, commanded by Lieutenant Prisoners of War. Werner Hartenstein commenced a humanitarian rescue, embarking 193 survivors. U.506 and U.507 were also dispatched to assist in towing lifeboats. However, on September 16, a U.S. 4-engined aircraft attacked U.1515 despite it flying a Red Cross flag, forcing the U-boat to dive and abandon the rescue. This tragic event led to the infamous Laconia Order on September 17, 1942. U-boats decreed, all attempts to rescue survivors of ships already sunk must cease. Hitler himself informed FOO U-boats that he did not wish rescue operations to endanger U-boats. This directive, a stark ethical turning point, generated significant controversy and demonstrated the increasing operational pressure on U-boat commanders. German technological and bureaucratic deficiencies further hampered the war effort. Admiral Donitz complained about dilatory methods in torpedo development and construction, pushing for the rapid development of Walter-type U-boats, a revolutionary design promising high submerged speed. An early prototype, V.8E, achieved over 23 knots submerged, but naval staff hesitation and design changes led to significant delays. These Walter boats, while influential in thought, never became operational, representing a significant missed potential. German radar, such as the early Beat and later Fu MG, was often inadequate, with limited range and search arcs. The primitive Metox receiver, while offering good results within a limited range of frequencies, was merely a reactive countermeasure. U-boat anti-aircraft armament was initially weak, a single 2 cm machine gun being quite inadequate against attacking aircraft. Though new twin 3.7 cm and twin 2 cm mountings were developed by mid-1942, they proved insufficient against escalating Allied air power. Crucially, the Luftwaffe's prioritization of the Eastern Front over naval air support severely limited the U-boat's ability to counter Allied air escorts. A critical request for the multi-purpose, long-range He-177 aircraft was diverted by Hitler, with the Luftwaffe deeming further naval requirements too exacting and beyond technical realization. This inter-service rivalry crippled U-boat operations in remote areas. Persistent flaws in torpedo components further compounded German difficulties. Impact pistols were unreliable at angles less than 50 degrees. Magnetic pistols remained unreliable. In the first half of 1942, 806 torpedo hits were needed to sink 404 ships, highlighting a critical inefficiency. New weapons, like the acoustic torpedo and the FAT torpedo, which followed a looping pattern, were developed, but their widespread deployment was slow. Defensive measures against air-stick pursuit were also explored, including cylinders discharged from U-boats to create false echoes and experimental rubber and plastic hull coatings. By 1940, U-boats could dive to 160, 180 meters, with new Type 6 IC boats rated for 200 meters. Despite these efforts, U-boat losses, which had dropped to 6% in September 1942, were acceptable, but the overall picture was one of increasing struggle. German radio intelligence, penetrating enemy code and cipher systems, provided vital convoy information, but could not compensate for these fundamental deficiencies. The German U-boat war effort was sustained by sophisticated intelligence gathering and operational planning. The constant flow of decrypted Allied signals provided precise operational data, allowing U-boat command to place patrol lines effectively. Their war diary entry from September 9, 1942, noted consistent convoy tracks 300 to 500 miles north or south of Great Circle routes. A report to Hitler on September 28, 1942, speculated that Allied shortage of shipping meant they could no longer afford to send his ships on wide detours. The U-tankers played a decisive role, significantly increasing the number of convoy operations and the average number of U-boats per attack. For example, between July and September 1942, 15 convoy operations involved an average of 13 U-boats per attack, compared to 11 operations with 8 U-boats per attack in the same period in 1941. These tankers were positioned 50 to 100 miles astern of the convoy, enabling sustained presence. German operational strategy aimed to disperse the surface escorts, ensure continuity of contact, and launch attacks in areas where convoys have no air escorts. Night attacks and a patrol line moving westward at night at 9 knots were common tactics. However, the increasing presence of Allied air escorts, particularly from bases like Greenland, posed a significant threat, forcing U-boat attacks to be broken off. The battle for convoys intensified. In the attack on SC-104, Lieutenant Commander Troja of U-221 claimed 11 ships sunk, but actual losses were 8. In the brutal attack on SC-107, and 2 escorts torpedoed, yet the cost was high. U-520 was lost to air attack, and U-132 due to an ammunition ship explosion. Such discrepancies between claims and reality, often due to the difficulty of post-attack observation, led to an overestimation of U-boat success. U-boat effectiveness varied across zones. The Trinidad area remained highly productive, with 25 ships sunk for the loss of only 1 U-boat between October 1st and November 7th. However, off Freetown, despite deploying 6 to 8 U-boats, results were disappointing due to sea and air escorts, shallow depths, and calm seas. A new threat emerged with twin-engine bombers used for night air attacks in coastal zones. The Allied landing in North Africa, Operation Torch, on November 8, 1942, directly diverted U-boat resources. Despite sophisticated German intelligence gathering and a focus on a potential Spanish landing, Torch achieved complete surprise. German naval staff appreciated that a second front was militarily impossible and underestimated Allied amphibious capabilities. The U-boat dispositions were largely unaffected by preparations for Torch, with forces concentrated on routine Atlantic operations or distant targets like Cape Town. U-boat command received news of Torch at 6:30 on November 8. Immediate orders were given for 15 U-boats to proceed to the Moroccan coast at high speed, but they were too late to interfere with the landings. U-173, however, achieved a surface attack in Fedala anchorage on November 11, sinking 1 transport and damaging a tanker and the USA destroyer Hambleton. U-130, submerged attack, on November 12, sank 3 American naval transports near Fedala. But Allied air and radar defenses intensified within 20 to 30 miles of the coast, making surface movement impossible. The period between late 1942 and early 1943 illustrated the complex, often frustrating, and ultimately attritional nature of the Battle of the Atlantic. The Torch redeployment directly led to reduced U-boat activity in other theaters. Fuel shortages and reliance on new tankers created critical vulnerabilities. 9 U-boats, some being by then practically empty, had to wait to refuel from U-460 on November 21, 1942, a perilous process often involving floating 5-gallon drums on a line in rough weather. Severe weather conditions consistently disrupted U-boat operations. Protracted storms, bad visibility, and violent westerly gales prevented refuelings, obscured targets, and hindered pursuits. U-boat commanders struggled with unskilled interpretation of hydrophone noises, with one commander reportedly pursuing a school of whales for several hours. The Allies employed special buoys which simulated propeller noises to deceive U-boats. Despite these challenges, German intelligence efforts continued, with U-524 fitted with a special receiver for recording British activities on VHF. The U-boat groups faced formidable odds. During the attack on convoy HX-217 in December 1942, German claims of 6 ships sunk were dismissed as only moderate by their own analysis due to the numerical strength of the escorts, and 2 U-boats were lost. A tragic collision between U-221 and U-254 on the night of December 8 resulted in one U-boat sinking and only 4 crew rescued, underscoring the chaos and danger. The attack on ONS 154 saw 13 ships totaling 67,000 tons sunk, but again at a high cost to the U-boats. The beginning of 1943 marked a period of intense U-boat activity against Allied convoys. Radio intelligence provided crucial leads, such as for the major attack on SC-118, which left New York on January 2001. Between February 4 and 9, 1943, 20 U-boats engaged SC-118, claiming 14 ships sunk. 13 were confirmed lost, but 3 U-boats were also destroyed, highlighting the brutal attrition. Similar patterns unfolded against 166, where U-boats claimed 23 ships sunk, but only 14 were confirmed, with 1 U-boat lost. Logistical challenges remained acute, with U-boat groups like Hardegen forced to end patrols due to fuel shortages by mid-February. U-tankers U.460 and U.462 refueled 27 operational boats between February 21 and March 5, a testament to their critical, though risky role. Technological issues persisted. The new Pi-2 torpedo pistol, designed for both contact and magnetic firing, proved unreliable under certain track angles or sea states. The G7 fat torpedoes, while raising hit rates to 75% in convoy attacks, produced a conspicuous bubble track that was easily detected in clear waters. Allied sea and airborne radar demonstrated high performance, making running attacks near land impossible. Remote areas also proved unsatisfactory. A tragic friendly fire incident saw U.43 sink the German blockade runner Doggerbank on March 3, 1943, a stark reminder of the inherent dangers and confusion of naval warfare. On January 30, 1943, Admiral Donitz was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Navy. This pivotal change signaled the critical importance of the U-boat campaign in German strategic thinking. However, by March 31, 1943, U-boat command staff was transferred to Berlin, a move perhaps indicating a shifting strategic landscape. The survival capacity of tankers remained a significant factor, often requiring multiple torpedoes to sink. By early 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a critical turning point. The initial, devastating impact of the U-boat offensive had given way to a relentless attritional struggle. Allied defenses, initially unprepared, had rapidly evolved. The widespread adoption and improvement of radar, the introduction of effective air reconnaissance, high-frequency direction finding, the Lee light, and the crucial deployment of escort carriers fundamentally shifted the balance of power. By March 1943, it was clear that the extent of enemy radar made traditional U-boat patrol line analysis redundant. German efforts to counter Allied ASW, particularly in radar detection with the primitive Metox receiver and effective anti-aircraft weaponry, proved inadequate. The internal inertia and lack of cooperation between German operational and experimental establishments had cost irreplaceable time. The crucial intelligence gap, filled by Allied radio decryption, provided a critical advantage, allowing them to anticipate U-boat dispositions and circumvent patrols. U-boat losses, which had been relatively low in late 1942, began to climb dramatically through the early months of 1943. Despite continued operations and the commitment of numerous U-boats, the success rate became increasingly moderate or poor. The immense physical and psychological strain on U-boat crews from prolonged patrols and depth-charge pursuits was unsustainable. The collapse of the operations in the Atlantic in May 1943 was the devastating culmination of these converging factors. The once dominant U-boat threat was decisively countered. This period marked a profound strategic shift, demonstrating the critical importance of technological superiority, adaptive tactics, and effective intelligence in modern naval warfare. This pivotal shift was no accident. The increasing effectiveness of Allied radar, particularly for detecting U-boats surfacing, fundamentally altered the battlefield. This superior Allied radar, especially airborne radar, allowed detection at greater distances and in challenging weather conditions. Simultaneously, improved Allied anti-submarine tactics emerged, including the systematic deployment of air and sea escorts. Advanced weaponry, like depth charges and radar-guided gunfire, made sustained U-boat attacks increasingly perilous. New methods of underwater location, such as hedgehog and mousetrap, further amplified Allied defensive capabilities. German U-boat command, however, remained dangerously reliant on outdated technology. Their primitive Metox receiver, a standard radar search device, could not detect the new enemy radar frequencies. This critical flaw left U-boats vulnerable and severely hampered their operations. Further compounding their problems was a reliance on inaccurate intelligence. German claims of sinkings were vastly inflated, masking the true severity of their losses and fostering a false sense of success. For example, claims by U-boats in March 1943 amounted to 780,000 tons sunk, but British post-war figures revealed only 500,000 tons. The text challenges this self-perception of success, demonstrating that claimed sinkings did not reflect true Allied losses. Against convoy UGS-6, U-boats claimed 6 ships sunk, yet only 1 actual sinking occurred. This constant overestimation led to misallocation of resources and missed opportunities. The deployment of more U-boats into convoy operations, while increasing the proportion of ships sunk within convoys, also exposed them to more concentrated Allied defenses. The proportion of ships sunk in convoy rose dramatically, from an average of 39% in the second half of 1942 to 75% in the first quarter of 1943. This was a double-edged sword for the U-boats. While they targeted convoys more frequently, they faced an increasingly formidable and coordinated defense. The disastrous results of convoy battles in May 1943 revealed the U-boats' declining offensive capability. The catastrophic losses experienced in operations against convoys like ONS-5 highlighted the unsustainable nature of U-boat attacks. In that engagement, a claim of 16 ships sunk, totaling 90,000 tons, was made. Yet, the operation was deemed a reverse due to the heavy loss of 6 U-boats destroyed. Against convoy HX-233 was destroyed and only 1 ship was sunk by U.628. During operations against HX-234, despite 11 boats making contact, only 2 ships were sunk, and 1 torpedoed. Air protection for HX-234 became so strong that U-boat operations against it stopped on April 24, 1943. This combination of Allied technology and tactics marked a critical awakening for German intelligence. The realization that their reported sinkings were significantly exaggerated and that Allied radar was a severe threat confirmed their precarious situation. Admiral Donitz's own diary entry of May 6, following the abandonment of the ONS-5 pursuit, highlights the critical need for radar countermeasures. By May 22, 1943, a staggering 31 U-boats had been lost. Approximately 60% of these losses occurred while U-boats were in transit or waiting, not in direct engagement. Air attacks alone accounted for an estimated 55% of U-boat losses. The temporary evacuation of the North Atlantic by U-boats on May 24, 1943, was a stark admission of Allied defensive superiority. This decision to shift operations southwest of the Azores represented a significant strategic shift. The U-boat campaign's offensive power was fundamentally crippled. The balance of power in the Battle of the Atlantic shifted decisively from German U-boats to Allied forces. The German High Command's growing awareness of the U-boat war's impending failure led to discussions of suspending convoy operations and a desperate search for technological countermeasures. This strategic redirection of U-boat efforts towards southern operations was a direct consequence of the overwhelming dangers in the North Atlantic. This era effectively debunked the notion that U-boat attacks remained effective despite their technological limitations. Advanced Allied radar and anti-submarine warfare rendered U-boat tactics increasingly obsolete. It also highlighted the unreliability of U-boat sighting reports, often confused by distance and environmental factors. Such unreliability led to misallocation of resources and missed opportunities, while the G7E torpedoes, particularly the Pi, 2 inches magnetic pistol, were plagued by detonation and true running defects. A rare success occurred off Freetown. Here Henke, commander of U.515 Time, achieved a significant victory, sinking 8 ships totaling 50,000 tons, reportedly utilizing Pi .2 magnetic pistols effectively with depth settings of 5 and 7 meters. Yet, this was an exception to a growing pattern of failure. The vulnerability of upper deck containers for torpedoes to depth charge attacks was also recognized. An order for their removal on all operational boats, specifically Type 1XE boats, was issued on April 30, 1943. This systemic failure to adapt technologically created a critical gap.